Introduction. The first time I heard something walking outside my cabin, I told myself it was a polar bear. That was the reasonable explanation. The thing moved slowly through the snow, circling the building with a heavy, deliberate rhythm. One step, then another, then silence. I stayed in bed with my eyes open, listening to the walls creak beneath the Arctic wind. Then it stopped directly outside my window. I expected to see a white shape. Fur. Claws. Maybe the long shadow of an animal standing on its hind legs. Instead, I saw a hand pressed against the glass. It had 6 fingers. And behind it, somewhere beyond the frozen darkness, something whispered my name. My name was Daniel Mercer. I had taken the logging job because I needed money and because the company promised more than I could earn in a year back home. They said the work would be difficult, but temporary. 6 months in the Arctic, cutting a remote section of black spruce. No towns nearby, no roads, no cell service. Just 30 workers, a private airstrip, and a logging camp surrounded by hundreds of miles of ice. The company brochure described the place as untouched wilderness. That was the first lie. The second was that we were alone. Body. The flight to the camp took almost 4 hours after we left the last inhabited settlement. From the window, the world looked dead. Snow covered everything in a blank, white sheet. Dark forests appeared below us like bruises beneath the ice. There were no roads, no houses, and no signs that anyone had ever lived there. Then the pilot pointed toward a thin line of smoke. "That's your new home," he said. The camp was smaller than I expected. A row of metal cabins stood beside a fuel depot and a large processing building. Beyond them was the forest. The trees were tall, narrow, and black. Even in daylight, they seemed to absorb the light around them. Our foreman, a broad man named Harris, greeted us beside the landing strip. "You follow the marked routes," he said. "You stay inside the perimeter after dark. You don't go into the forest alone." Someone laughed. Harris didn't. "There are bears," he continued. "There are cracks in the ice. And there are places where the ground isn't as solid as it looks." He paused before adding one more warning. "If you hear knocking outside your cabin, don't open the door." Nobody asked why. Maybe we assumed it was another safety rule. Maybe we didn't want to sound afraid. The first few weeks were normal. We worked long hours cutting trees and hauling timber toward the frozen river. The cold was so sharp it hurt to breathe. Every morning, ice covered the inside of the cabin windows. At night, the wind screamed across the camp. But eventually I noticed something strange. The trees we cut never stayed down. One morning, we cleared a section near the northern boundary. We cut down almost 40 trees. The next day, several were standing again. Not all of them. Only 7. They were upright, rooted in the snow as if they had never been touched. The stumps were gone. Our supervisor blamed a navigation mistake. "We logged the wrong area," he said. But I had been there. I remembered one particular tree because its trunk had a deep split shaped like a human mouth. That same tree stood in front of us. The split was still there. Only now, the opening looked wider. One of the workers, a young man named Owen, walked toward it. "Someone carved this," he said. He placed his gloved hand inside the split. Then he froze. "What is it?" I asked. Owen slowly pulled his hand away. His glove was wet. Not with snow. With something dark. The smell reached us a second later. Rotten meat. We reported it to Harris. He ordered us back to camp and told everyone to stay away from the northern forest. That night, Owen disappeared. His bed was empty. The cabin door was locked from the inside. His boots were still beside the heater. There were no footprints outside. Only a line of small, circular holes leading away from the building. The holes continued toward the forest. They looked like something had pushed thin fingers into the snow. The search lasted 3 days. We found nothing. Then, on the 4th morning, Owen returned. He was standing beside the fuel depot, barefoot. His skin was blue. His eyes were open, but he didn't react when we called his name. Harris ran toward him. "Where were you?" Owen smiled. "I was with them." His voice sounded wrong. It was too deep. Too many voices seemed to speak through the same mouth. Harris grabbed his shoulder. Who? Owen turned toward the forest. The ones underneath. Then he began laughing. He laughed until blood came from his nose. That was when the lights went out. The entire camp fell into darkness. A second later, something struck the roof. Then another impact. Then hundreds. We rushed toward the windows. Shapes were falling from the sky. They hit the snow and disappeared. Small black objects. When the lights returned, we went outside. The ground was covered in teeth. Thousands of them. Human teeth. Animal teeth. Some were too large to belong to anything we knew. Owen was gone again. This time, his footprints led directly to the forest. Harris ordered everyone indoors. No one slept. Around midnight, the knocking began. 3 slow knocks. Then silence. 3 more. It moved from cabin to cabin. Knock. 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 Nobody opened a door. Then the sound reached my cabin. I sat on the floor with my back against the wall. The knocking stopped. A voice came from the other side. Daniel. I didn't move. Daniel, it's Owen. The voice sounded almost normal. Open the door. I'm freezing. I stared at the handle. Something scratched across the metal. Please. Then the voice changed. It became softer. Older. It sounded like my father. My father had died 9 years earlier. Daniel, it whispered. You left me there. The temperature inside the cabin dropped. Frost spread across the walls. I covered my ears. The voice continued. You know what happened. Then the knocking stopped. For several minutes, there was nothing. I thought it had gone. Then 6 fingers slowly appeared beneath the door. They were pale and thin. They moved across the floor like the legs of an insect. I grabbed the emergency axe. The fingers reached toward my boot. I swung. The blade struck the floor. The hand vanished. Outside, something screamed. It wasn't an animal. It sounded like a crowd of people screaming from deep underground. The next morning, Harris gathered everyone in the processing building. He looked exhausted. There's something you need to know, he said. The company had known about the forest. Decades earlier, another logging crew had worked in the same area. They discovered a network of tunnels beneath the trees. The tunnels were older than the camp, older than the first settlements. The workers found strange carvings underground, figures with long arms, 6-fingered hands, faces without eyes. Then people began disappearing. The company sealed the tunnels and abandoned the site. But the forest continued growing. The trees covered the entrances. And every few decades, the company returned. They needed the timber. They needed the money. And every time people vanished. Why didn't you tell us? Someone shouted. Harris looked toward the floor. Because no one would have come. Then the building shook. A deep crack split the concrete. The lights flickered. From beneath us came a sound like breathing. Slow. Heavy. The floor opened. A dark hole appeared in the center of the building. Cold air rose from below. And something whispered from the darkness. We remember. The workers ran. Some reached the doors. Others didn't. Long arms emerged from the hole. Pale hands grabbed people by their legs and dragged them underground. The screaming lasted less than a minute. When it ended, only 6 of us remained. Harris led us toward the airstrip. The company plane was scheduled to arrive that afternoon. We crossed the snow without speaking. Behind us, the forest moved. Trees bent toward the camp. Their branches twisted together. Then I saw Owen. He stood beside the runway. He was smiling. You can't leave, he said. Harris raised his rifle. Move. Owen shook his head. They're awake now. The ground beneath him opened. Hands reached upward. Dozens. Hundreds. They pulled Owen down. He didn't scream. He kept smiling until the darkness swallowed him. Then the trees began moving. Not swaying. Walking. Their roots tore through the snow as the forest advanced. We ran toward the plane. The pilot had already started the engines. One by one, we climbed inside. Harris was the last. He reached the door just as something grabbed his ankle. He fired into the snow. The rifle clicked empty. Then he looked at me. Close the door. I grabbed his arm. Something pulled harder. Harris screamed. Close it. I shut the door. The plane lifted. Through the window, I watched the camp disappear beneath the trees. The forest closed around it. Within minutes, there was nothing left. No cabins. No runway. No people. Only snow. Conclusion. The company paid us to remain silent. They called it an industrial accident. They said the camp had been destroyed by unstable ground. The survivors received money and signed documents. Most of them disappeared afterward. I never learned what happened to them. For years, I tried to forget. Then last winter, I received a package. There was no return address. Inside was a photograph. It showed the Arctic camp. The cabins were standing. The runway was clear. And every missing worker was outside. Owen stood in the center. They were all smiling. On the back of the photograph, someone had written, "We kept your place." I burned the photograph. The next morning, it was on my kitchen table. That night, I heard 3 knocks at my front door. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't open it. Then someone whispered my name. Not from outside. From beneath the floor. And when I looked down, I saw frost spreading across the wood. 6 pale fingers pushed through the cracks. They were searching for me. The company thought the forest was trapped beneath the Arctic ice. They were wrong. We didn't bring something back from that place. We only showed it the way home. And now, every winter, more people disappear. Authorities blame the storms. They blame the cold. But sometimes, in the middle of the night, people hear knocking. 3 slow knocks. Then a voice belonging to someone they lost long ago. If that ever happens to you, don't open the door. And whatever you do, don't look beneath the floor. Because they aren't asking to come inside. They're checking whether you're ready to go back. For 3 years after leaving the Arctic, I convinced myself that the forest was gone. I told myself the things I had seen were the result of exhaustion, fear, and months of isolation. But every winter, the same nightmare returned. I would wake inside my old cabin. The walls would be covered in frost. Something would knock 3 times. Then I would hear Owen's voice outside. "Daniel, they're still waiting." The nightmare always ended the same way. 6 fingers would slide beneath the door. But one night, I woke before the fingers appeared. I was lying in my apartment. The room was dark. The clock read 3:17 a.m. Then I heard 3 slow knocks. Not in the dream. From beneath my bed. Knock, knock, knock. Body. I didn't move. The sound came again. 3 knocks. Slow and deliberate. I stared at the floor beside the bed. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then the temperature dropped. My breath became visible. Frost spread across the wooden floor. It moved toward the bed like thin white veins. I reached for my phone. There was no signal. The screen turned black. Then a message appeared. "We found you." I threw the phone across the room. The knocking stopped. A whisper rose from beneath the bed. "Daniel." It was Owen. His voice sounded distant, as though he were speaking through deep water. "You left us." I climbed off the bed and ran toward the door. The handle wouldn't turn. I pulled harder. Nothing. Behind me, something scratched against the floor. Slowly. Closer. I refused to look. Then I heard a second voice. "Harris. Don't let it see your face." My hand froze on the door. Harris had been dragged beneath the snow. I watched it happen. Yet his voice was directly behind me. "Daniel," he whispered. "Close your eyes." I did. The scratching stopped. For a moment, the apartment became completely silent. Then something breathed against my neck. The smell was familiar. Rotting meat. The same smell that had come from the split tree in the Arctic. I kept my eyes closed. A cold hand touched my shoulder. It had too many fingers. "Open your eyes," it whispered. I stayed still. The hand tightened. "Open them." Then the apartment lights suddenly returned. The cold vanished. The hand disappeared. When I opened my eyes, I was alone. The front door was unlocked, but the floor was covered in wet footprints. They began beneath my bed. They crossed the room. Then they stopped at the window. I walked closer. Outside, snow was falling. Across the street, a man stood beneath a streetlight. He wore an orange logging jacket. The same uniform we had worn at the Arctic camp. His face was hidden beneath a hood. I opened the window. "Who are you?" The man slowly raised his head. It was Owen. His skin was pale. His eyes were completely black. He smiled. Then he pointed toward the sky. A dark shape moved through the clouds. At first, I thought it was a bird. Then it grew larger. It was a plane. The same company plane that had carried us out of the Arctic. It flew silently above the city. Words were painted along its side. "Returned to camp." The plane vanished behind the clouds. When I looked back, Owen was gone. But something was lying on the snow. I crossed the street and picked it up. It was an old radio. The company logo was still visible. The radio turned on by itself. Static filled the air. Then Harris spoke. "Daniel, if you can hear this, don't trust Owen." The signal crackled. "They aren't dead. They're changing." I held the radio closer. "What do you mean?" For several seconds, there was only static. Then Harris whispered, "The forest isn't a place." The radio went silent. I stared at it. A final message appeared on the small screen. "The forest is growing." That was when I noticed something impossible. Across the city, every tree was covered in frost, even though it wasn't winter. Conclusion. The next morning, the news reported strange power failures across the city. People claimed they had heard voices beneath their homes. Several children disappeared during the night. Police found no signs of forced entry, only small circular holes in the snow, the same marks I had seen outside Owen's cabin. I knew what was happening. The Arctic forest had followed us, and somehow it was growing beneath the city. That night, I packed a bag. I found the old company documents and a map of the logging site. There was only one place where I could find answers. I had to return, not because I wanted to, because something beneath the ice had already started calling me home. And this time, I knew we were not alone. The company told the world the Arctic camp had been destroyed. But when I searched through old records, I found something they had missed. A supply flight was scheduled to land there every winter. The camp was still operating. Someone was still feeding it. And someone or something was still waiting for me. 3 days later, I boarded a cargo plane heading north. I didn't tell the pilot why I was going. I only gave him the coordinates. The moment he saw them, his face changed. "You're going back there?" he asked. "Yes." He looked toward the frozen horizon. "People don't go back." "I know." He stayed silent for the rest of the flight. Body. As we crossed the Arctic, I looked down at the endless snow. Then I saw the forest. It was larger, far larger than before. The black trees stretched across the ice in every direction. They shouldn't have been able to grow in that frozen ground. But they had. And at the center of the forest, smoke rose into the sky. The camp was still there. The cabins stood exactly as I remembered them. The runway was clear. Lights glowed behind the windows. The pilot refused to land. "I'll circle once," he said. "Then I'm leaving." "You said you'd wait." I changed my mind. Before I could argue, the radio turned on. Static filled the cockpit. Then a voice spoke. "Daniel." The pilot froze. The voice came again. "Daniel, come home." It was Owen. The plane suddenly shook. A dark shape passed beneath us. The pilot pulled the controls. The engine screamed. Then the radio whispered, "Land." The pilot's eyes turned toward the runway. His hands moved without control. "Stop," I shouted. But the plane began descending. We landed hard. The wheels struck the ice. The aircraft slid across the runway before stopping beside the old camp. The pilot didn't speak. He stared through the windshield. Then he slowly pointed toward the trees. "What is that?" Someone stood between them. It was Harris. He wore the same jacket from the day he disappeared. His face looked pale, but otherwise normal. He raised one hand. 6 fingers pressed against the glass. The pilot screamed. The cockpit door opened by itself. Cold air rushed inside. When I turned back, the pilot was gone. There were no footprints. Only a dark trail leading toward the forest. I grabbed my bag and ran toward the nearest cabin. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything was clean. Beds were made. Food sat on the tables. The heaters were running. It looked as though the workers had never left. Then I saw photographs covering the wall. Pictures of every logging crew, every missing worker, every person who had entered the forest. At the center was a new photograph. It showed me standing outside my apartment. The picture had been taken the night before. Written beneath it were 4 words. The last one returns. I stepped away. A floorboard creaked behind me. Owen stood in the doorway. His face looked human again. "Why did you come back?" I asked. He smiled. "You brought them a path." "What does that mean?" "The forest couldn't leave before." He walked closer. "Not until you survived." I raised the emergency flare gun. "Stay back." Owen looked at the weapon and laughed. "You still think we're trapped here?" The lights went out. Something moved beneath the floor. The walls began shaking. Outside, the trees bent toward the cabin. Their branches scraped against the windows. Owen whispered, "They're not under the forest anymore." A crack opened across the floor. Cold air rose from below. Then voices began calling my name. Hundreds of voices. Some belonged to missing workers. Some belonged to people I had never met. Then I heard my father. "Daniel." I dropped the flare gun. Owen grabbed my arm. "Don't listen." The floor split open. Hands reached upward. Owen pulled me toward the door. We ran outside. The camp was changing. The cabins were sinking into the snow. Black roots pushed through the ground. The forest was moving closer. At the edge of the trees, I saw people standing silently. Hundreds of them. Missing workers. Missing children. People from the city. All staring at me. Then they smiled together. Conclusion. Owen dragged me toward the runway. "There's a tunnel beneath the old processing building," he said. "What's inside?" "The beginning." We stopped. The ground shook beneath us. A huge shape moved under the ice. Something was waking. Owen looked terrified. For the first time, his smile disappeared. "We don't have much time." "Time for what?" He stared toward the forest. "To stop it from spreading." Then every tree in the Arctic turned toward us. And from deep beneath the snow, a voice spoke. Not Owen's. Not Harris's. Something much older. "Welcome home, Daniel." The voice beneath the snow spoke my name again. "Welcome home, Daniel." The ground trembled. Black roots burst through the ice around us, twisting like enormous veins. The trees leaned closer, their branches scraping against one another. But the sound they made wasn't wood. It was whispering. Hundreds of voices spoke at once. Some begged for help. Some laughed. And some repeated the same sentence. "You open the way." Owen grabbed my arm. "Run." We raced toward the old processing building as the forest moved behind us. The trees were no longer rooted. They walked. Body. The processing building had almost disappeared beneath the snow. Its metal walls were covered in black roots. The front door hung open, moving slowly in the wind. Owen pushed me inside. "Where's the tunnel?" I asked. "Below us." The floor was cracked. Cold air rose through the gaps. I remembered Harris telling us about the tunnels decades earlier. But this was different. The floor had been torn apart from below. A staircase descended into darkness. "After you," Owen said. I looked at him. "You were dragged underground." "I know. You disappeared." "I know. Then what are you?" For the first time, Owen looked afraid. "I don't know anymore." We walked down the stairs. The deeper we went, the warmer it became. The walls were covered in strange markings. 6-fingered hands. Eyeless faces. Tall figures standing beneath black trees. Then I noticed something worse. New carvings had appeared. Buildings. Roads. Cities. The forest wasn't showing its past. It was showing where it was going. At the bottom of the stairs, we entered a huge underground chamber. Roots covered the ceiling. They stretched across the walls and disappeared into the darkness. At the center stood a tree. It was enormous. Its trunk was wider than a house. And inside the bark were faces. Thousands of faces. Some were sleeping. Some were screaming. Then one face opened its eyes. "Harris." "Daniel," he whispered. I stepped closer. "Harris?" "Don't touch the tree." His face twisted. They're listening. A deep sound echoed through the chamber. A heartbeat. The giant tree moved. Its branches lowered toward us. Then the voice spoke. You returned. The tree's bark opened. Inside was a dark space. Something moved behind it. I raised my flare gun. What are you? The voice answered. We were here before the ice. The roots tightened around the walls. We slept beneath the earth. Images appeared across the bark. Ancient people. A forest. A great fire. Then ice covering everything. They buried you, I said. They tried. The chamber shook. The tree showed another image. A logging machine cutting through the ground. Workers opening the tunnels. The forest awakening. Then I saw myself, standing beside the plane years earlier. You let me escape, I whispered. Yes. Why? The faces inside the tree smiled. You carried our voice. I remembered the strange dreams. The knocking. The frost spreading through my apartment. The voices beneath the floor. It hadn't followed me. I had brought it with me. Owen stepped forward. No, he said. He didn't know. The roots suddenly wrapped around his legs. Owen screamed. Daniel. The fire. I looked at the flare gun. The tree can burn, Owen shouted. But you have to destroy the heart. A section of the trunk opened. Inside was something glowing. A dark red shape. Beating. The heart. I aimed the flare gun.
The voice laughed.
You will destroy them too. The faces inside the bark began screaming. Harris looked at me. Do it. But you're inside. We're already gone. The roots pulled Owen toward the tree. Now, Daniel. I fired. The flare struck the heart. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the chamber exploded with light. Fire raced across the roots. The tree screamed. Not like an animal. Like thousands of people crying together. The ground broke apart. I ran toward the stairs. Behind me, the forest began collapsing. But then I heard Owen. Daniel. I turned. He stood beside the burning tree. The roots were pulling him inside. Go, he shouted. I'm not leaving you. You already did once. The ceiling began falling. Owen smiled. This time, he looked like himself. Don't let it reach the city. Then the darkness swallowed him. Conclusion. I escaped as the processing building collapsed. Fire spread across the snow. The black trees burned. For the first time, the forest stopped moving. I fell beside the runway and watched the flames rise. Maybe it was over. Maybe I had destroyed the thing beneath the Arctic. Then I heard a sound behind me. 3 slow knocks. Knock. 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 I turned. A small black root pushed through the snow. It moved toward my boot. Then another appeared. And another. The forest was still alive. The fire had destroyed its heart. But the roots had already spread. Far beyond the Arctic. Far beyond the ice. I looked toward the sky. Dark clouds were moving south. And beneath them, somewhere thousands of miles away, people were beginning to hear knocking beneath their floors. The forest had not been destroyed. It had only been awakened. And now, it knew the world was waiting. By the time I returned to the city, winter had disappeared. The snow had melted. The streets were crowded. People went to work, drank coffee, argued over traffic, and lived as if nothing had changed. But I could hear it. Beneath the sidewalks. Beneath the buildings. A slow, heavy heartbeat. And every night at exactly 3:17, the knocking began. 3 knocks. Always from below.
Body.
The news called it a series of unexplained disappearances. People vanished from locked homes. No broken windows. No forced entry. Only frost covering the floors. And strange marks left in the ground. 6 narrow holes. Like the fingers of a hand. I knew the forest had reached the city, but I didn't know how far it had spread. Then I received a message from an unknown number. Come to the old subway station. Come alone. Below the message was a photograph. It showed my apartment. Someone had drawn a black tree on my front door. I went that night. The station had been closed for years. The entrance was blocked by rusted gates. But when I arrived, the gates were open. Cold air drifted up from the darkness. I walked down the stairs. The station lights flickered. The walls were covered in black roots. They stretched across the floor and disappeared into the tunnels. Then I heard someone crying.
Owen.
The sound stopped. A figure stepped onto the platform. It was Harris. His clothes were torn. His face was pale, but his eyes were human. "You survived," I said. He shook his head.
No.
He pointed toward the tunnel. "They sent me."
Who?
"The people inside the tree." I raised my flashlight. "What do they want?" Harris looked at me. "They want you to finish what you started." The ground shook. The roots moved. A tunnel wall cracked open. Behind it was the Arctic forest. Impossible. Black trees stretched beneath the city. Snow covered the ground. And far away, I saw the old logging camp. The forest had connected both places. The Arctic was no longer thousands of miles away. It was underneath us. Then Owen appeared. He stood between the trees. "You came back," he said. "I tried to save you." "I know. Then why are you here?" Owen looked toward the forest. "Because it needs a new heart." The trees began whispering. My name echoed through the darkness. "Daniel." The roots wrapped around my feet. I tried to pull away. Harris grabbed my arm. "Don't listen." But the ground opened beneath us. We fell. When I opened my eyes, I was lying inside the underground chamber. The giant tree was gone. Only a burned stump remained. But something was growing from the ashes. A new heart. It was small.
Red. Beating.
The voices returned. "You destroyed the old heart." The roots tightened around my arms. "Now you will replace it." I understood. The forest had never needed me to escape. It needed someone to carry its voice. Someone to connect the Arctic to the outside world. Someone who could become the new heart. Owen stepped closer. "There's another way." "What?" "You can destroy the roots."
How?
"You have to destroy everything connected to them." I looked around. The roots reached into the city, into homes, into streets. Destroying them could bring the entire city down. Thousands could die. The forest whispered, "Choose." I closed my eyes. Then I remembered Harris's words. "Don't let it reach the city." I grabbed the emergency flare gun, the same one I had carried from the Arctic. I aimed it at the new heart. Owen stepped in front of me. "Wait. What are you doing?" He smiled. "You need to leave." The roots wrapped around him. "No. I was never supposed to come back." He placed his hand over the heart. The red light grew brighter. "Do it." I fired. The chamber exploded. Fire rushed through the roots. The walls collapsed. Owen disappeared inside the flames. I ran. The tunnel shook behind me. The station began collapsing. I reached the stairs and escaped just before the entrance fell into the ground. For hours, the city trembled. Then everything stopped. The knocking ended. The frost disappeared. The roots turned gray. By morning, the streets were quiet. The disappearances stopped. The news blamed an underground gas explosion. No one believed me when I tried to explain. Maybe that was better. Conclusion. Months passed. Winter returned. But nothing happened. No knocking. No voices. No frost. I thought the forest was finally gone. Then one night I found a package outside my door. There was no name. Inside was an old photograph. It showed the logging camp. All the missing workers stood together. Harris.
Owen.
The pilot. Everyone. They were smiling. But there was one person I didn't recognize. He stood in the center. He wore my jacket. His face was hidden. On the back of the photograph were 6 words. "The forest always grows around its heart." I dropped the picture. Then I heard 3 knocks. Not beneath the floor.
From inside my chest.
Knock. 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 I placed my hand over my heart. Something moved beneath my skin. 6 thin shapes pressed outward. And from somewhere deep inside me, Owen whispered, "Daniel." I looked into the mirror. My reflection was smiling, but I wasn't. Then the lights went out. And behind me, black roots began growing across the walls. The Arctic forest was gone. The tunnels were destroyed. The city was safe. But the forest had never needed the trees. It only needed a heart. And somehow, I had become the last thing it needed. So, if you ever hear 3 knocks in the middle of the night, don't search for the sound. Don't open your door. And don't look beneath your floor. Because the forest is no longer waiting beneath the ice. It is walking among us. And somewhere in the darkness, it is still looking for someone new.